our two panellists for today, because you've heard from both of them in yesterday's session. Professor Mark Burry, AO, who's the founding director of Smart Cities Research Institute and Professor of Urban Futures at the Swinburne University of Technology. In March 2017, Mark was appointed as the new Foundation Director of Swinburne's Smart Cities Research Institute. He joined Swinburne from Melbourne School of Design at University of Melbourne, where he was the Professor of Urban Futures prior to his Swinburne appointment. And this is something I really have to mention because it's kind of fascinating. He's also the Executive Architect and Lead Researcher at the Sagrada Familia Basilica in Barcelona, Spain. So please welcome Mark to the stage. Secondly, Jarmo Eskelinen, the Chief Innovation and Technology Officer from Future Cities Catapult in the UK. As Chief Innovation and Technology Officer, Jarmo helps accelerate Future Cities Catapult's ideas to market, brings together potential partners and collaboration, and is constantly striving to innovate across the many challenges that we face in the urban sector. His team brings together businesses, universities and city leaders so they can work with each other to solve the problems that cities face. Please welcome Jarmo to the stage. Now, the format we're going to be following for this afternoon's, or should I say this morning's panel session, is I'm going to invite Mark and Jarmo to make a few opening comments. You've got the basic questions are actually in your program, the kind of issues that we're seeking to address and cover in this panel, but there'll be others that will come up in the course of conversation. So they'll both say a few words of my introduction. I'll then ask them a couple of questions to get the panel discussion going, but I really hope that you will interact very actively with this panel. This is a great opportunity to have a conversation, not just to sit there and to listen. So just one final reminder also, I did hear a few sneaky noises coming out of telephones in this morning's session. Would you please make sure that you've turned them to silence to give our panelists the maximum opportunity to interact with you. So, Professor Mark Burry, over to you.
Thanks, Martin. My first one? Yes? Yeah. Well, I'm going to talk very briefly to the proposition of how do we lay the foundations for a smart society by going through the 5 points that are listed there. Starting with what are the building blocks for a smart society. I'm going to digress immediately by just talking about some sort of autobiographical moments that were pivotal in finding myself here as a director of a Smart Cities Research Institute. I'm an architect by training. The first of those pivotal moments was a lecture I had when I was at university in the UK by Marcel Eschnike, who was one of the top urbanist theorists, recently deceased, alas. So in 1976, he said, at the time that the UK was building a freeway around the orbital, M25, around the city of London, some radius, and he said, of course, this is pointless. We know already that every time you build a new road, within 1 year, it will be 10% over capacity. And that's stuck with me ever since. That's my entire professional career. I've had this thing that just seems to be proven time and time again. We solve the problem by adding more capacity, and we immediately create a new problem. Now, the second point was when I was warned off taking too much interest in Barcelona as a city for many reasons. And being from this part of the world, being warned off meant it was they lit my blue touch paper and off I went to find out what was so curious about Barcelona. How come it had been one of the 5 most creative cities up until quite well into the 20th century, along with Milan, New York, Paris and London. And when I went there, I discovered the famous Serre plan. I'm sure most people in the room have seen it and marveled at it. But not so many people know what its origin was. It's actually yesterday we heard that Rome was the first smart city. Well, certainly one of the first smart cities was Barcelona, because the foundation of that city was through an empirical study by an engineer called Ildefonso Cerdà, who literally measured all the things that were going wrong in the existing city, which had been constrained within the city walls. And he found through empirical evidence for the first time that health and overcrowding were linked. If you're overcrowded, you have poor health outcomes. There had been sort of associations between cholera and overcrowding, sort of specific, but he was the first person to statistically prove that there was a link. And then he went on to make a smart layout. The city is planned so that a tram could go in any corner. There's those corners which are chamfered off so that the trams can, there's no predetermined route for the trams. The railways were all already put underground, even though there were steam lines. They found a way. And that's why the city is so, I think, livable. It also is one of the world's most densely populated cities, although you wouldn't know that when you're there. It feels just about right. And of course, by having that particular density, you always have an ironmonger or a fishmonger or a fruit shop within easy walking distance. So all my life, having been brought up, first of all, in the suburbs of Christchurch, New Zealand, all my life I've known that, professional life that is, that a denser city has all sorts of advantages that way outperform for me all the things I want to do in the city. So that was seminal. But there's nothing to do with digital, but I think it was smart. And the next moment was in Geelong in 1998 when something called VRML had come out, and we could, for the first time on a website, give the population of Geelong a 3D model that had been carefully constructed. They could swivel it around, and you could see the effect of development. We needed some money, of course, to make it go online, so we had a council visit. We had the entire council who looked at it with complete horror. They said, why on earth would we want to give the public this? It's just going to cause one, well, I won't tell you the word they used, but it was a fest was the second word. They did not think it was going to be an appropriate thing to have. So I'm thinking, well, that's 20 years ago, so we've got at least 20 years of possibility at reasonably low cost of being able to show the public what might or might happen. So this is, well, there's one more, of course. There's the Ernst Fuchs book, X-Ray the City, published in Melbourne in 1946. So that's 72 years ago. X-Ray the City is his study of future Melbourne. They realised in 1946 that Melbourne was cruising for a bruising in terms of the population expansion. The suburbs were going out, the transport wasn't going in. And so he defined, I don't know if it was 20 minutes or 30 minutes, but he actually defined that. He talked about the polycentric nature. It's there. It's been in writing between hardcovers for all of Melbourne to look at and learn from, and it's been ignored to the extent that most people won't even know that it exists. I know that our colleague from Wellington, who I mentioned yesterday, was surprised. So it's there. It's an important piece of work, but more important still was the fact that it had no influence. So in answering the first question, the building blocks for me is to actually understand what does smart mean. Perhaps it's not clever, which I think is what it tends to be taken to mean, but it means knowledgeable or informed. So it's an informed, a smart society is an informed society. In terms of the second point, which is what are the government, industry and policy makers, what will they need to do to nurture a smart society? Last year, Angus Taylor, just after we had been formed as an institute at Swinburne, Angus Taylor came with Josh Frydenberg for a visit. It was a real privilege. They were there for an hour, and his first question, Angus Taylor being the former Assistant Minister for Cities, and his first question, without missing a beat, was what we think was the single biggest challenge. I wasn't sure whether I was supposed to say, well, of course it's mobility first, or no, we've got to get people better housed. And I said, I think on behalf of our institute, the single biggest problem that we face is lack of frameworks. Plenty of policy, very few frameworks. And there was no dissent. We didn't spend the rest of the meeting talking about what is a framework. By framework, I mean something where there's a consensus that we will be healthy, all of us, and that we will design our city so that everything about them encourages us to live a healthy lifestyle. I don't think that is something we could attest to today. The third one was, can we develop a charter for becoming a smart society? And if we look at a charter as being the grant of authority or rights, recognising the prerogative of the recipients to exercise their rights as defined, then I think a charter would be very, very good. A charter would have to come through consensus, but if we actually said that what we meant by a smart society was something that we could all agree with and could all work to, that would be brilliant, in my view. The fourth question was, what would a smart society look like? Well, that's, as we've heard, I think, from all sorts of contributions so far, it's going to be a very engaged society. A society that's engaged with all the decisions that have been made on its behalf by others, but usually using their money. So there's a link. It would be a well-informed society, and it would be a digitally confident society. And I'm appalled to think back again to 2000 when I applied for the Professorship of Innovation at RMIT. I had 3 key things I was going to do. And one of them was to deal with the problem of what I call the young blades, the digital blades, the youngsters who were just so adept at digital 3D thinking, this is in 2000, that they held their senior colleagues in thrall. Either the senior colleague would say, this isn't real architecture, this isn't real urban design, or they say, I don't know what it is, it looks awfully complicated, and I therefore trust you. They were the fuddy-duddies. And see, now I'm sitting on this couch, fuddy-duddy myself. I'm having the same sort of worries. But the fact is, in those 18 years, we've still got the same problem. We have an awful lot of people who are major decision makers who are not digitally enabled or gifted or enfranchised. And they often react against it. And I've got all sorts of anecdotes which I can't share at this minute, but I can provoke. What is the role of the private and academic sector in this endeavour? Well, this is where I really have to make sure I don't go on too long. But I did mention yesterday, I think there's an incredible opportunity for a partnership between universities, government and industry. So we don't get vendor-led or government-driven or sort of ivory tower sort of wankery, I guess. But we actually have all 3 working together. And the beautiful thing about where we're at is, as Mr. Dixon, I made a note. Brooke Dixon is the president of the Australian Smart Cities Association. He very elegantly recently pointed out that a smart city is just a term. What we're really talking about is change management from analog processes to digital processes. So I think that the beautiful thing about cities is they're so complex that none of us can afford to try and claim the territory. We don't need to compete. So I think all of the local governments could be working together to come up with similar solutions. Academics certainly shouldn't be trying to claim the territory. That's certainly the case at Swinburne. We don't claim the territory, we just want to be part of the group that contributes to these huge challenges. And that's why we have 4 programs. One is governance, so how we will have new ways of representation at Parliament level through bottom up. We're looking at the future home and workplace. That's going to change in staggering ways, particularly workplace. WeWork, as an example. We heard about that yesterday. The third one is smart mobility. That's changing as we sit here, and we need to be embracing it and on top of it. And then the fourth one is the future systems for energy, water, and waste disposal. Now, I mention this because it is the single crystallization of where we're at, which is universities have to play a bigger role in society, I believe, up front, but only if they can find ways to deal with their silos. And the beautiful thing about the Smart City caper is that it goes right across the whole university, from hardcore technologies to applied arts, architecture and urban design and media in the middle. And therefore, the Smart City debate actually invigorates universities for possibly the first time to find a real sense of purpose. So I'm with Craig in terms of problem statements. if we all get round problem statements, we've all got an easy pathway to become a smart society.
Thanks very much, Mark. That's a terrific introduction addressing the points. Jan, over to you.
Well, what's to say after that? First, good morning here. I've been spending the morning sleeping. The jet lag caught up with me, and I woke up a bit over an hour ago. At least I'm well rested now. Then to the to the topic of the day. I think I will be sticking because this kind of discussion can go anywhere. Because what which society would like to be smart, so I'll stick to the question about the role. I make an assumption here that smartness means using technology. It doesn't necessarily mean, but I'm just, in my address will be having that, and smartness is using tech. And second, I will be talking about smartness as the way to govern the society, or that society meaning the ways to govern the society. So how can the technology affect the way we rule and manage our society, so that there's some sort of framework in which I can stay. And from that viewpoint of how technology could be used to renew the way we run this place or these places, there has been quite a bit of takes on the topic over the years. The most notable probably were by in the UK a couple of years back when they talked about the big society, and there was definitions made back in the day. Charles Lewis and David Wong wrote a big innovation paper in which they say that smart society successfully harnesses the potential of digital technology and connected devices and the use of networks to improve people's lives. And I think this is sort of an underlying trend in lots of the smart society thinking, that the technology is being used to improve people's lives. There are some criticisms towards it, especially because it still sees that somebody improves people's lives for them. In this definition, somebody does it for the people, and that somebody is the faceless government, maybe the ruler. And Irene Ng from the University of Warwick has criticized that, saying that human being is excluded from here, and she's keen on the smart me and not the smart thing. And I think that comes closer to my thinking. But maybe it's good to stick to a few domains in which there currently is a strong discussion going on around the how smartness can be used to run societies. I think the three topics I want to touch, or three domains, is first, kind of an incentivation-based society. Second, a decentralized blockchain society, which is a very active domain of this discussion at the moment. And thirdly, the question of data, personal data, and the ownership of the data, which is also very active at the moment. So I'll touch these three. The first one, the incentivation-driven society, because that's something which is happening in China at the moment, and it's seen being published as kind of a new thing. They are basically providing tools for ranking people, tools for acquiring points, kind of good citizen points, which can be then used for good citizen services. And if you have low points, then you have you're a bit low on services. Probably not quite as straightforward as that, but close. And it's been published as the sort of a big brotherish story, and that's of course what it is. Then again, it's nothing new in the Chinese system. We all know it's not a democracy, and different ways to recognize who's good and who's not have been around for decades, and this is the latest manifestation of that. And frankly, there are ways which currently insurance companies talk about managing our insurance in smarter ways, banks talk about managing our money in smarter ways, are not that far away from the Chinese model. Chinese have it on the level of the whole society, and insurance companies have it on the level of managing insurance, but fundamentally it's like are you a reckless driver? We want to recognize you're a reckless driver because then you should pay more. Which kind of makes sense. But if you extrapolate that to the level of society, we actually talk about the same thing. We are talking about measuring us on a constant basis and deciding what's allowed and what's not based on that measurement. And I'm not saying here now whether that's a good or a bad thing. That's fundamentally, that's the phenomenon which is ongoing, and it's not only in China. So it's very well embedded in service businesses and the way companies think about managing their customer relations with us, because the tools are there. And the more fine-tuned information you have about us, the easier it is to provide just the right services for us, but also to monitor how we use and on which terms can we use those services, both for the society and for commercial services. Second area, and that's the counter thesis, or the counter thinking to this sort of government monitors us and incentivizes us to be good. The second camp is the blockchain anarchists, which are very strongly present in the online discussions of smart societies at the moment. So how has anyone dipped into that landscape? Some people have, some hands are raising. Basically, in a nutshell, I'm doing horrible misjustice here. So in a nutshell, the idea behind the blockchain-driven society thinking is that blockchain is fundamentally a trust creation mechanism without having to trust anybody. That's the basic idea of blockchain technologies. Because the core tech is complex, but the thinking, the model is that if you are able to capture every transaction, and every transaction needs to be approved or signed off by all the other nodes, which are part of the transaction system, you can't counterfeit it. You can't, do fixes there. You are accountable for the transaction wherever they happen. And that's how virtual currencies work. If I give you a virtual currency, that's a deal between me and you, Mark, but it becomes written in the blockchain, and it can be visited and proven that this did happen. And it's been proven by all the other stakeholders without any central government. That's the core. And in that thinking, we could do the same for the society. We don't need the government. We can just have person-to-person or peer-to-peer or organization transactions which are being captured in blockchains, and there is no need for Big Brother to monitor what happens there. So blockchain society talks about sort of a small groups of people which kind of self-govern, or bigger groups of people which self-govern. There's a charter which dictates the rules. Everybody signs off for that in blockchain. And then you are either in or out. You decide to opt out, and then you are part of some other society, however big or large that society might be. It's typically probably not governed by geographical borders. You can decide the society you join. And fundamentally, I think it comes from the anarchistic thinking that we people could actually agree if we just had the tools to agree well. And frankly, without going too much into criticism, I think it keeps on escaping the fact that the wicked problem is a wicked problem because it's not possible to solve it. That's the challenge of politics. So most issues we deal with in politics, aging, inclusion or the lack of it, are problems for which there is not one solution. Whichever solution you take is only partial. So politics is a game of compromises. And the more problematic issue we deal with, the less we have right answers. And for most big societal problems, there's not a right answer. There are only partial solutions. And that's hard. Those are difficult ones to sort out on consensus, because you can't have consensus on ideological matters. Because other side really loses in that case. The other side wins. So, but anyway, that's the second camp. And the third camp, sorry, I conclude shortly, is my data or data ownership. And there's a strong advocacy of that in Nordic countries, so I'm being part of the Nordic My Data. Should I say movement, My Data movement, which basically the core ideology or thinking of the My Data movement is that people should be able to govern their data and own their data wherever it is. My data is my data, no matter which platform I'm using, and I must be able to opt out from giving the permission to use it, get it in machine readable format, reuse it myself, regardless of who offers the service, whether it's a company or a government. And it further discusses the ways to manage my data, which is that the consent giving and the data itself should be separated. There should be a separate consent giving layer in which I manage permissions, what's to be done with my data, and then the data creators which hold the data, respecting whichever consent agreement I am done with them. So that I could, for example, have a very different agreement with Facebook than I currently have, because that agreement would come from my consent-giving authority towards Facebook. And that was to become a toolbox approach to personal data management. So, and I think, well, these are the three current trends. I'm not saying, one of them is better. They all have downsides. So what I conclude with is two things. First of all, anybody who says what will happen when technology is used at large to use these kind of things in our societies and claim that they know what will happen, they are wrong. I'm wrong when I'm saying that I would know what happens in a blockchain-driven society. Nobody does. Technology and the sort of disruptive power of using tech, it always has second-tier and third-tier impacts which nobody can see in advance, except some very smart people who take advantage of it before anybody notices. And just read the Cambridge Analytica case and be proven about that. There are people who can see and can take benefit, and sometimes they have good purposes, and very often they have bad purposes when they do it. And that fundamentally means that we should experiment and test and try out everything before we implement it at scale. Whichever claims are being made by tech, we must try it first, for the very purpose before we scale it up. And second, and this is I think the most important thing, if you don't remember anything else, remember this please, technology is a tool, it's not an ideology. Ideologies can't be replaced by technologies. There must be a reason, an ideological reason, a vision of the society, which is not technology itself, but something beyond technology, because technology is a means to an end. And technology companies, technology advocates try to fool us thinking otherwise. And it's been going on for always. I mean, arts and crafts movement 100 years back in the United States was manifested as the democratization of fabrication, as an ideology that, by the sewing machine will free you from the burdens of industrial manufacturing, and will free you to make your own clothes, and everybody can then sell these clothes to each other. Does that sound like 3D printing? And the trick was to make people buy sewing machines. So fundamentally that it fed to the industrialization as everything else. The similar kind of claims have always then fed to industrialization or some sort of centralized system. So let's not fool ourselves to think that tech is ideology. Ideology is something much better and bigger than tech.
Thank you so much, Jarmo. That was a very rich outline of a number of very